Union leaders are warning that thousands of nurses could leave the NHS unless the government reverses its plan to award staff a pay rise of just 1%.
After a year of fighting on the front line of the pandemic, nursing trade union leaders have described it as pitiful. We're joined now by Health Minister Nadine Dorries, a former nurse herself in a previous life, of course. Nadine Dorries, thank you for joining us this morning. I think everybody will appreciate that we have been through unprecedented times. We heard the Chancellor stand up yesterday talking about how difficult it's going to be to manage the finances going forward. But if you were a nurse this morning and no longer a politician, how would you feel waking up, having fought on the front line of the pandemic, to hear that a 1% pay rise was all you were being offered?
Well, I think it's important, if I may, just begin by saying that we hugely appreciate the effort of all NHS workers, nurses and all workers over the past year. And I myself was once a nurse in receipt of a pay rise and know how much they are appreciated. But I think it's important to put in context that no other public sector pay worker is receiving a rise this year, and many have also had difficult times. And those in the private sector have indeed, many have lost their jobs and are unemployed as a result. And nurses have received, newly qualified nurses have received a 12% increase over the past 3 years.
The question was, you know, if you were a nurse waking up this morning rather than a politician that has to defend this policy, if you were a nurse, if you'd been fighting on the front line, putting yourself in harm's way in the face of this pandemic and this virus that is killing people globally, millions of people, how would you feel with the idea of a 1% pay rise?
So I hope that nurses will feel, and I hope that I would feel, and understand that we have to prioritise saving people's jobs and saving people's livelihoods. You know, a year ago this week, we were looking in the face of a global pandemic with no idea of what the cost would be in terms of life and financially. And a year later, hopefully, we're coming out the tail end of this pandemic. And our priority now has to be about protecting people's livelihoods, keeping people in work. Because, you know, without a strong economy, without people in work, without the business grants, without protecting employers, there will be no funding for the NHS. We need a strong economy to protect the NHS. The past year was about saving lives. The next year has to be about keeping the economy stable and saving the economy.
Well, that's, you know, there are other issues about saving lives too, aren't there, along with the economy? That's the problem. But, you know, of course, we know in our heads that that needs to be. But I think the problem is that we've heard so many words from government about the wonder of the NHS, about the brilliance of nurses. They've been part of the most successful bit of the government's programme, delivering the vaccine. They've been the people doing the delivering. We've all clapped for carers. We've all said praise. And then the reality looks like a 1% reward for 110% effort. And it's going to sit uncomfortable. You say you hope they understood, but the unions don't, do they? The unions don't understand. They think it's pitiful. And I wonder if any of your former colleagues that you've worked with have been in touch. Have you talked to them? You know, do you have any nursing friends? Are you still in touch with that side of it to know what that reality must feel like for them?
I've literally just been speaking to one of them on the phone via WhatsApp just a few moments ago. So, yeah, you know, everything you said is right. Well, first of all, it would be a very rare day indeed if the unions concurred with a Conservative government in terms of our recommendations for a pay increase. So I think that's a fairly obvious point. But, you know, everything you said in terms of our clapping for carers, our appreciating our nurses and our staff, all of that is genuinely felt and genuinely meant. We absolutely do value and appreciate every one of our healthcare workers, our nurses and our doctors. And nobody else, no one else, no other public sector worker is receiving a pay rise. Their pay has been frozen. Many people in the private sector have lost their jobs or on reduced salaries, and the economic future for them is uncertain moving forward. They don't know, many don't know if they will have jobs continuing moving forward. But it was important to us that the NHS did receive a pay rise. And I really hope that nurses understand that protecting people's jobs, people's lives, continuing with the furlough scheme, continuing to keep people in work, has to be our priority coming out of a pandemic. And the next year has to be, we spent 10 years fixing the economy after inheriting a complete mess of an economy from the last Labour government. Our priority now is not to let that go to waste. Our priority is to keep that economy stable so that we can keep people in jobs. And we need that strong economy in order to fund the NHS moving forward. And I hope nurses understand that at this point in the cycle, this point at the end of the pandemic, keeping as many people in work as we possibly can is our priority. And they are the only people to receive a pay rise. And I just want to finish on, nurses have had, rightly so, a 12% increase over the last 3 years. The average nurse's salary, rightly so, is now £34,000 a year.
I mean, that was only for those, 2015 to 2020, so a bit longer than 3 years, but also it was for the lowest paid, wasn't it? It wasn't across the board. But it's taken the average nurse's salary now to £34,000 per annum, and every penny of it is deserved.
So look,
and
Nadine Dorries, I know that this is a recommendation at the moment, that it's a 1% pay rise, and I know that it will be a response to what comes back from this as to whether that is considered or whether that is changed. What are the parameters which would mean the government actually increases that? Is there any chance that actually on review, once you engage the response, which has been pretty compelling against this and how derisory it is as an amount, that it will increase, that you will change it, you will listen to what's being said and try and find some more money so they do feel more valued financially?
Well, those discussions will take place moving forward, and they're above my pay scale. But the government will enter into discussions on that's the point of the recommendation. The recommendation has been made to the pay review body. They will take recommendations and have information fed back to them from across the stakeholders in the healthcare sector. So none of us can predict what will happen in the future, but of course every recommendation will be evaluated and discussed.
Would you like to give them more?
Our position is at the moment 1% is what we can afford if we're going to save and protect jobs and livelihoods moving forward for the next year.
What we do know, what we can predict, is there's trouble ahead, isn't there? Not just with the economy, but with the health service, and particularly in your area, your sort of specific ministership, in terms of mental health and provision in the community. Were you surprised and, I presume, disappointed not to see any sort of social care put into place or helped specifically by this budget? Because that is going to be really, really important for all the areas, isn't it?
Kate, I'm really glad that you just mentioned mental health, because it's the reason why I'm here, I hope, today is actually to talk about the £79 million that we've announced this morning to go into children's mental health, as part of the £500 million that we mentioned during the spending review, on top of the £2.3 billion we're investing in mental health year on year. The announcement that we've made this morning on the £79 million is to specifically help the children and young people who've been affected by the pandemic. And we know who they are, because we know from a demand on NHS services exactly who needs them, to help those children and young people moving forward out of the pandemic, establishing a 24/7 helpline, adding more funding into CAMS so more children can be seen by CAMS, children and adult mental health services, and to put more mental health support teams into schools. That's what we've announced this morning, and that's where we're directing funding to help those, and particularly young women with eating disorders, where we've seen a huge increase over the pandemic over the past year.
It's much bigger than that, though, you know that, and it's great. Well done. Great to have that money there. Very good. But it's much, much bigger than that, though, isn't it? It's not just related to that, although it's a very worthy cause. It's across the board, mental health problems for many areas of society. And social care failings is something that this government committed to sorting out at the very beginning.
And those discussions are taking place, and we are attempting to, that is a priority also. We did look towards having a cross-party consensus on this. And we are hopefully engaging on this. we are moving forward on, social care is a very long term and a very complex issue. And that is something, there's a separate group looking at that and working on that.
Okay.
And that's, and the health minister, Helen Whately, is making tremendous progress and doing a really good job on that.
Right.
But, on mental health, Kate, 2.3 billion, no other government has invested anything like that amount of money into mental health. And that's exactly what this government's been doing now for 3 years and will continue to do.
Nadine Dorries, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us this morning.